Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh crap moment in court? As a law student, we were allowed to make court appearances under the supervision of an assistant district attorney. I was doing arraignments and my ADA said don't talk to the judge unless he asks you a specific question. So the judge and the defense attorney were going back and forth about when the next court date would be. The judge wanted a specific date, let's say 4/20. The defense attorney was adamant that she couldn't do that date. In my file, I had a calendar with a big X over 4/20 saying do not schedule. The judge and defense attorney go back and forth for several minutes. The judge wanted 4/20 and the defense attorney saying no. I was keeping my mouth shut because the judge hadn't asked me directly. Finally, the defense attorney relents and agrees to 4/20. The judge turns to me and says, do the people agree with 4/20? At which point I say, sorry your honor, but we cannot schedule for 4/20. The judge looked at me for a second and then just ripped into me, Mr. Jones 1. You just heard me and the defense go back and forth for several minutes about a date you knew the people couldn't do. Do you like wasting the court's time? It went on like that for a few minutes. Him just berating me in front of about 200 people in a court in Brooklyn. Finally, after me apologizing profusely and him giving me a withering glare, we moved on and went to the next case. At the next break, the judge said, Mr. Jones 1, please approach the bench. I thought I was really in for it then. I walked up beside the bench. The judge came down to talk to me and said with a big smile, don't worry about it. I was just giving you a hard time. Welcome to Brooklyn Criminal Court. Opposing counsel was a nightmare. Everything late. His work was extremely subpar, and so forth. Accused me of lying multiple times when he had dropped the ball. During another hearing in which he did another dumb move, judge says, I'm glad you are the last case on the call, and all of the other attorneys have left the room, so they aren't here to hear me say that you are a terrible attorney. During jury selection, I can't be a juror due to the fact I'm kinda racist. Not a lawyer, but I had a big oh crap moment. I was in court for driving while suspended in a county and in front of a judge that were both notorious for putting people who did that in jail. My license wasn't supposed to be suspended. A pencil pusher forgot to press a button or something and it never got unsuspended after the time was up. I had proof of this, but I was still really nervous. The guy who went up to the judge before me walked to the table where we were supposed to stand, sat down, and put his feet up on the table. The judge asked him what he was doing and he gave a flippant answer and basically told the judge to get fricked. This seriously peed the judge off. The judge went off on this guy and the guy gave everything right back to him. Peed him off more and more. The judge ended up jailing him for contempt and had the bailiff cuff the guy and put him in a chair off to the side to await the marshals who would transport him to the jail. My name gets called. The judge is looking at me like I am fresh meat and he is a great white shark. I am already thinking to myself, okay, if this judge puts you in jail, run over and beat the crap out of the guy that peed the judge off so badly. He's why you're going to jail. The judge looks down at his paperwork and back at me and says, you're Mr. My last name? I said yes sir. He said, yeah, we were talking about you earlier. I am going to void your arrest and dismiss this case. Your license was supposed to be valid and you shouldn't be here. I let out a huge sigh. The judge asked me if I was okay and I said I had been a bit worried, especially given the guy that was right before me in line. The judge said don't worry about him, he won't be seeing anything that isn't behind bars for about 90 days, and laughed. That's how a judge is supposed to be. Watching a hearing when the defendant said I did stab her, but it was a gentle stabbing. Reminds me of something I read on here where the person said I hit her with a knife. Stabbing. That's called stabbing. Not a lawyer but shared an oh crap moment with one. I hit something in the road and had a tire blowout while driving home from MEPS. Hit a concrete divider and wound up rolling my car. No injuries and no other vehicles involved. Received a reckless driving ticket that the officer told me was just procedure and not to be concerned with. Fast forward a month and I'm in court with my lawyer who plans on pointing out this ticket could prevent my hardship enlistment. He's not expecting it to take more than a minute because the issuing officer and prosecutor are on board. Q group oh crap moment. I'm fourth on the docket and the judge has just handed out maximum sentences for all 3 prior defendants. The people are getting 6 to 12 months, having licenses revoked, for little stuff. The prosecutor gets screamed at the instant he opens his mouth. Police officer is told to shut up while answering a question the judge asked. My lawyer is told he's about to be held in contempt. I'm starting to think I'm gonna get 3 squares and a cot. Just not where I planned on getting them. The judge told me to step forward while shuffling my case paperwork and my lawyer just gave me a look that said, "I'm so sorry. Case dismissed in the interest of justice, and if any more idiots waste his time with nonsense like this again, everyone is spending the night in county." Medical malpractice defense lawyer here representing hospitals doctors. This was not my oh crap moment but plaintiff's oh crap moment. For context, usually at trial, both plaintiff and defendant will have an expert physician testify as to their opinion to whether the doctor hospital performed everything correctly. I thoroughly researched plaintiff's expert, who was an OB-GYN, baby delivery, and found out he had been suspended a number of times for his own botched deliveries and giving incorrect medical testimony to help plaintiff's cases. During the actual day of trial, turns out he was not licensed to practice medicine independently without supervision from another physician, and he was 1 year into his 3-year suspension. Plaintiff's lawyers had no idea about their own expert's background and they just sat there with a blank look on their face. Needless to say, during cross-examination, we destroyed his credibility and won at trial. I was prosecuting a contempt action in family court, something that basically never works, and everyone in the room could tell I was winning. The other side was unprepared, out of arrogance, and I was basically ripping this guy to shreds on cross-examination, which his lawyer didn't even think would happen, because he expected the case to be dismissed. At the end of the trial, the judge ruled for me and stated that she found the defendant's testimony to be untrustworthy. I was shocked at winning a contempt trial to begin with, but then this exchange happened. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, now that you have found my client's testimony to be untrustworthy, I am requesting a continuance in order to prepare further witnesses. This concept is shocking in and of itself, because to even think you can bring more witnesses after you rest your case is laughable. Judge, you had your shot and you missed. Counsel. Defendant's attorney, Your Honor, there was no way I could have anticipated that you'd find my client's testimony untrustworthy, and as such, I didn't have the opportunity to prepare other witnesses in support of his position. Judge, that may be an argument for your career, counsel, but it holds no water with me. See you this afternoon for sentencing. For those who didn't pick up on it, the judge basically told the lawyer on the record in front of his client that she expects him to get sued for malpractice because he fricked up so royally. That crap was mind-blowing on multiple levels. I've had a couple. Best one was when I was a youth prosecutor defense attorney in teen court. The youth defendant was on trial for assault. I asked him what happened and he said, "My friends told me I wouldn't beat up the Easter Bunny at the mall, so I did. Only time I truly could not control my laughter in court." Another, I was watching a detention hearing in federal court. Only issue is whether the defendant will get to go home until trial. This was an appeal of the court's previous decision that the defendant be held until trial. The third witness was an FBI agent, which, needless to say, is not normal at a detention hearing. The FBI agent testified that some other attorney, not the one representing the defendant at the hearing, had been taking letters from the defendant and sending them to different people for the defendant. Those letters were contracts to have the prosecuting attorney killed. The representing attorney withdrew and the defendant was not released pending trial. One more. I was in traffic court one time and a sovereign citizen who was acting fairly hostile began approaching the judge's bench. He was arrested at gunpoint, which was pretty wild considering there were 150 or so people in the courtroom. Last one. My first ever civil trial, I was representing the plaintiff who wanted to evict the defendant from her property for non-payment of rent. After presenting my case, the judge asked the defendant to present his evidence. The defendant replied, "Huh." The judge said, "Now is your turn to present your case." The defendant said, "I don't understand." The judge leans over the bench and asks, "Why are you here?" The defendant said, "Oh yeah, right." The defendant then went on a 30-minute tangent about all sorts of things, like how he only parks his car so he can see where he is going when he pulls out because that was taught when he was in the military. I could have objected, but the more he talked, the more the judge disliked him. After 30 minutes the judge finally asked, "About the rent?" The defendant says, "Oh yeah, I'm not trying to debate that, I didn't pay it. That's how I won my first civil trial." Not in court but a deposition. Plaintiff in a sexual harassment case that was suspected to be paid roleplay with her boss kept a very detailed diary on her work computer. At one point she was asked to read from the diary for the record and asked if she had written the accounts and if they were true. She was asked at several points if she wanted her new husband to leave the room while she did this, but declined. Let's just say it was extremely kinky. She confirmed it was true, and the only mention of her now husband was that he was boring in bed, but she was going to marry him because she couldn't get her first, second or third choice. He ended up leaving on his own after she read that part out and confirmed it was him she was writing about. Not a lawyer, but I witnessed my ex-wife try to argue with the judge that she couldn't be accused of kidnapping our daughter because our daughter was legally emancipated. Not a spoiler, she wasn't. At the time of the kidnapping, my ex had legal statutes written on small sheets of paper she had torn out of books in the jail library, and she kept arguing with the judge after being told that none of it mattered. After the 5th time my ex interrupted the judge with her nonsense, the judge slammed her hands down, stood up, leaned over her bench, and told my ex that she had been a juvenile court judge for 20 years and was well aware of the statutes. If she interrupted one more time then she would be held in contempt and spend several months more in jail. My lawyer held up his folder in front of his face to hide his grin during this exchange. I walked out with full legal and physical custody of my daughter, court supervised visitation for my ex, and a full restraining order. I was interning during law school prosecuting domestic violence cases. The deputy asked me to talk for the first time during a guy's arraignment for beating his wife. An arraignment is when the defendant hears the charges against them and pleads guilty or not guilty basically. When the judge calls on me to speak, I got insanely nervous and told the defendant that his charge carried a maximum penalty of 30 years when it was actually 30 days. He freaks out. The crowd, some in the gallery were his family and friends, gasps. The judge basically stops me and says, "I think you mean 30 days, counselor," after which everyone, including the defendant, laughed at me. I did jury service back in the 90s in the UK, a 4-day trial where an estate manager, dude in charge of the farms on a big landowner's estate, was on trial for growing and distributing cannabis. The police had raided the greenhouses and surrounding land and found tons of weed in all stages of production. Dude claims that he is addicted to cannabis and because his tolerance is so high after smoking so much for so long that he can only get a buzz from the very tips of the plant, where the THC content is most intense. Asks the court to believe that he just discards the rest of the plant, doesn't sell it, doesn't even give it away, just destroys the rest of the crop. So it's the last day of evidence, where both sides sum up their case and remind the jury of the salient points of what's been said. Dude himself has been quiet and respectful throughout, smart suit, softly spoken, stuck to his answers. I'd say the jury is not buying his claim, and as the judge reminds us, it's not about whether we think it should be legalized. It's not about whether we think he has even sold the remaining bits of his plants. All we need to find him guilty is to think that beyond reasonable doubt, he had at some point shared a single joint with a friend, and that was enough to convict him for supply on the counts against him. So the jury isn't buying his story, but we are also looking at him thinking he's quite old, isn't doing anyone any real harm, etc., is unlikely to be running a massive dealing empire. Then on that last day, the public gallery, which has been empty all week, is suddenly full of the most blatantly stonery stoners you've seen in your life. One of them is even wearing an Adidas Adahash t-shirt. The jury files in, we sit down, we look at the public gallery, and I think it's safe to say we stare at them. Defense barrister turns to see what we are looking at and visibly slumps, then glowers at the solicitor and hisses, "Really such an own goal." Plot twist. It was the prosecutor who invited them. 2 high-profile men on trial for killing another guy, both ex-cops from the 80s, a notorious time in our country for police corruption. The first trial had been aborted after one barrister had made a casual comment that the other accused had already killed 2 or 3 people. Second attempt was 6 weeks into an expected 10-week retrial. All of the networks and papers were covering this trial. The gallery was always packed with law students because of the many uniquely horrific aspects of the trial. So, we're 6 weeks into the retrial. Defense 1 gets up to cross-examine a witness. "Did you know of accused murderer 1? Yes. He was a cop and a drug dealer in the 80s. The court basically exploded. The judge immediately issued a non-publication order, meaning there was an embargo on all information from that day. It was early afternoon, but the judge excused the jury for the day, then spent the next day and a half deliberating over whether to abandon the trial. Over halfway through, and for the second time. The best oh crap moments are when your opposing counsel or opposing client says or does something that wins the case for you. True, in civil cases you usually know what will happen ahead of time. But in my state, discovery in smaller civil cases is more limited, and clients don't always want to spend $30,000 when we can get the same result for $10,000. In an adverse possession case, the witness only needed to say, "I use that area as my backyard," and I fully expected him to say this. It would harm my case, but I knew I could get around it. When asked about his use of the area, he said, "No, I never really went back there, didn't use it at all." Lost the case for the other side, and I could barely keep a straight face. It was completely opposite of what the witness had told opposing counsel off the record. Apparently the under penalty of perjury made him change his story. I had another case about losing multi-unit dwelling insurance because a guy's place was a fire hazard. I asked him if his personal insurer knew about the fire hazard. Yeah, and the jerks cancelled my policy. I also love it when I have a difficult party on the other side and the judge rips them a new one. I had a convoluted case with a lot of parties about nothing at all. The plaintiff was heinous. The 6 or 7 attorneys were working out calendars with the judge when the plaintiff starts yelling at her attorney from across the courtroom because she didn't like that he had conceded some little non-issue. Judge told her to sit down and shut up. I was sad that the case settled because she would have been amazing on the stand. Not exactly in court, but I was defending a juvenile robbery case where there was very little evidence. There was supposed to be 2 guys, but they only picked up this one kid. He had no stolen property on him. He was picked up like outside his own house, wearing different clothes than the victim had initially said. This kid was on the honor roll at school. His family seemed kind and were involved. He wrote poetry and played instruments. I actually believed it was a legit mistaken identity case. I went to meet with one of the kid's mentors for a character reference, and he exactly matched the description of the other robber. I was the dumbass that almost screwed myself. I had 2 charges in 2 different courts. I accepted the first plea, which almost always carries probation, but my plea didn't have that condition. When it came time to accept the second plea, the prosecutor didn't include probation because she assumed my first charge put me on probation. She said as much to the judge, and me being a big dummy almost corrected her. My lawyer grabbed my shoulder and, "I crap you not," told me to shut the frick up. She doesn't know. You almost became that kid that reminds the teacher about homework or an essay that's due. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.